All right. Okay, so I think we can start. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our seminar for this month. We are super excited to be joined by Dr. Shamsuddeen. He is going to talk about the illusion of inclusion, how large language models misinterpret African languages and cultural context. Um, Dr. Shamsuddin is a Google DeepMind Academic Fellow and Advanced Research Fellow at Imperial College London and Assistant Professor at Bayero University, Kano. He is also a visiting professor at Ains, Cameroon, and also South Africa, and York St. John University. His research focuses on NLP for low-resource African languages, promoting equitable language technologies. He has published at various conferences like ACL, EMNLP, NACOL, ICLR, and NeurIPS, and has received Best Paper Awards, right? And served as area chair for major NLP conferences. He's also the founder of Hausa NLP in Nigeria and Arewa Data Science Academy. He holds a PhD from the University of Porto, his MSc from University of Manchester, and bachelor's degree from Bayero University. So in this talk, Dr. Muhammad will reflect on like 2 decades of Africa NLP, uh, Africa NLP and community-led efforts that have advanced the field of NLP for African languages. He will discuss how large language models like misinterpret these languages and also the cultural meanings. And I think at this point, I will pass it to you, Dr. Shamsuddin, to share your screen and proceed with the presentation. Thank you very much for agreeing to give us a talk today.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and thanks everyone for joining, and also thanks for inviting me to give a talk here today. Can you hear me all? Everything okay?
Yes, and we can also see
Right.
your screen.
Perfect. So happy to be here to give a talk on the illusion of inclusion and how LLMs represent African languages. So as has already been introduced, my name is Shamsuddin, currently Google DeepMind Fellow and Advanced Research Fellow at Imperial, and also work a faculty member at Bayero University. So a bit about my career timeline. As you can see, I started from Nigeria. I did my bachelor in computer science. I moved to Manchester. I moved to University of Porto, and currently at serving as a Google DeepMind Academic Fellow and Advanced Research Fellow at Imperial. So this spans various, from Nigeria to Portugal to UK and back to UK sometimes. Then after all these, I'm also very interested in kind of mentorship and whatsoever. So I have been involved in, mentorship for MS student at M South Africa and Cameroon, also co-founder for Arewa Data Science House NLP, where we do mentorship and capacity building. I really, happy to be doing this stuff to see we have, people coming from less privileged background to receive support that they may not have. The content of this is basically 3 things. I'm not going to talk much, but only these 3 things. The first one is going to discuss about the journey for African NLP. And then also we're going to discuss about, the idea now we have LLMs that are, infiltrating anywhere. And then we have the illusion that, represent also African language. So we will see how or what happened. Do they really, represent African language, or they misrepresent it? And then finally, I will do some presentation on some of our selected works, regarding to African NLP. But everyone knows this now in AI and research in global south, and we can see now all these LLMs, everyone knows, and we are working with them in terms of text generation, image generation, whatsoever. But however, all these LLMs, they are actually mungles African languages. This is one of the reports from Science Magazine that report some of our work, that how LLMs represent. And I always, when I'm giving a talk, I always give an example. If you are attending my talk, you will hear one of these example. The example is basically one. One of my friend one time, went to Facebook and posted here something like, "We got a new baby." In Hausa, it means "Munsa Mikarua," means we got a new baby. But Facebook automatically translated to "we got prostitute." So you can see this one, it really changes the context, and also it changes the emotion. We got a baby is positive, and then we got a prostitute, which a prostitute, it's something bad. So this is how these language models, how these LLMs actually misrepresent Africa and also languages and also the culture. But right now, everyone believes that LLMs, they are redefining NLP research. As you can see, this is actually Google Translate from 2022 to date. The word NLP and also LLM, when being searched, this is a trend. As you can see, LLM is now getting surpassed even the NLP. So maybe one day in the future, we'll now stop saying NLP, but rather LLM, because everything is now going to LLMs. In fact, this year at ACL, 60% of the papers that are submitted, 67%, they mention LLM at the title or at the abstract. This means that the attention is now moving to LLMs. So PhD student, MS student, when you want to do research, you need to rethink. Are we really doing classical LLP now, or do we doing, the new shiny stuff, LLMs? So this is the current trend. When you are submitting to ACL, in fact, some people will say, "Oh, this paper, the LLM can do this stuff easily." So there is current shift in this way. But the problem is African languages, there are more than 2,000 languages. And all these things that we can see, LLMs can do many things on these languages. That's not true for African languages. And now, how can we drive progress in African languages? So there's kind of visibility gap, and we need to fix that because we cannot fix what we do not measure, right? So this is the idea now, that in this talk, I will do a very quick journey to African NLP, which is a 2-decade journey of African NLP. This is one of our work recently, that Rise of African NLP, Contribution, Contributors, and Community Impact. In this talk, I will talk about a little bit this stuff, publication growth in African NLP, and what kind of contribution do we have? What are the people contributing? What is the geographic spread? And who are also the key contributors? The first one is the way we did this, data collection is we collected 20 years of African NLP papers, and we have 36 papers, and we use LLMs. Of course, we are in the era of LLM. We use LLMs, for example, when we crawl, we use keyword, for example, from abstract and title, we use Nigeria, Kenya, or we use language Hausa. If there is language Hausa in the abstract or title, all those. So we have a lot of filtering stuff where we collect all these papers. And down there, we now comes to 2,400 papers, and then we do some annotation. So basically, this is a pipeline we did to collect the African NLP paper. The first one is the paper African NLP or not? We use LLM to filter that one after collection. And the second one, we use to classify what we call contribution, which I will discuss in a few minutes. And lastly, we use the LLM also to categorize what kind of contribution all those papers are. Is it machine translation, ASR, and a lot of contribution, and I will discuss this a bit. But the most surprising thing, you can see that one of the key things is that when you limit, thing that you can do with language, then you limit somebody's own world, right? But we can see now this claim is changing. As we rightly put it, the limit of my language means the limit of my world. Previously in 2007, you can see Africa NLP papers, as you can see, they are barely visible, right? But this continue to increase, and you can see a noticeable increase from this, sluggish movement in 2019 and whatsoever. And from here now, as we can see, AfricaNLP reached contribution, more than 2,000 contributed and over 400 publications. Only papers that relates to AfricaNLP, as you can see. But if you go down into this graph to see what really happened that, skyrocketed this participation for AfricaNLP, we can see the very first year here, we can see from 80, 60, 84, but it jumps to 152 in 2019 and also jumped in 2020 to 2,240. But what happened? This is the year where community-driven initiatives comes into being, such as Masakani, and also our workshop that we organize yearly, Africa NLP. What this tells us, it tells us that in Africa, the community drives the progress in NLP. And this also corroborates with white paper from Microsoft and community that come together, that the real progress in AI is dominated by community, grassroots movement, rather than by the universities, as opposed to in other countries. For example, in UK you see grant, in anything. This progress is driven by universities, by a big cooperation. But in Africa, it's just grassroots movement. In this case, we ask questions. The first one we ask is that, okay, now we have seen this is driven by grassroots movement, but one question we ask is that, what are the top organizations supporting the development of AfricaNLP? Now, what we did basically is this: we went to each and every paper, one of those 1,900 papers, we go to the acknowledgement sections and we manually annotated those papers. For example, this is one of my paper. Then we can see we have Google DeepMind, then we can count as one, Lacuna Fund, we can count as one. And we can see this is basically one of the contributors of different kind of entities. That we are not saying this is the real picture, but what we are saying, this also give us a ballpark estimate that tells from the data. Of course, we may miss some papers that do put some kind of recognition, but also example, some African papers they may not put in the they may put in firewall, and also they may not be visibly the way we clone our data. So this may not be the real clear-cut, contribution from audio, but this is what we have from our data set. We also asked another question that, what are the top affiliated institute organization of the authors? So this is really, really interesting in the sense that, given this is a paper, and we can see we have authors, we went to the authors, manually annotated all the 1,900 papers, and now we rank them. And interestingly, you can see University of Pretoria is basically one of the top. But however, we can see we have many universities that are coming not from Africa, right? We can see Carnegie Mellon, Zala University, Mbuzai, Stellenbosch. But we can see Masakani is also one of the top, which we already said, because when we write papers at Masakani level, we put Masakani as one of our affiliation. So this is kind of, as well as I said, it's not the real, perfect, analysis, but this is what we get from the papers we have. So we can see we typically collaboration in Africa actually expand the NLP study in African languages. But as well, you can see we have different kind of research theme in Africa. You can see here we have efficient, multilingual, machine translation. In 2025, you can see the diversity of the research theme we have in AfricaNLP. And this has keep increasing, growing. And you can see in 2024, the diversity of the research has increased largely. This is 2025, and I believe the diversity will increase. And this is kind of themes that we took from ACL, where we identify for each paper we took, we use LLM to given the abstract, given the headline, the title of the paper, we ask LLM to predict when of these theme, which of these themes the paper belongs to. So this is basically how we do that. As you can see, of course, AfricaNLP is progressing from few themes now to, you can see, we have many teams. But now, one of the questions we also asked in this report is, how can we automatically analyze contributions? So what is contribution basically in in NLP? So we created what we call AfricaNLP contribution dataset. Now, let me just start explaining what is contribution. We all know contribution is achieving, people made mention in their paper. For example, you can see here, one of the paper here, our evaluation reveals a significant performance gap between high resource languages. So this is a contribution, right? We can see from the paper, they contribute something. And this is this reveals a significant performance gap between high and resource languages is what we call contribution statement. Yeah. So for each paper in the abstract, we extracted what we call contribution statement. Let me go again. As you can see here, we have another contribution. We released 2 Setswana LLM translated benchmark. This is a contribution. What kind of contribution is this? It's what we call dataset contribution. What kind of contribution is this? Our evaluation reveals significant. This is what we call knowledge contribution. Now, we have different kind of contribution that I will show in the next slide, but we annotated contribution statement from the abstract of all the 1,900 papers that we got. And now we categorize them and try to find out what kind of contribution African NLP people are doing. Are they always creating data set? Are they always creating method? Are they creating language model? Who knows? So we need a way to automatically classify contribution. That's why we have African NLP contribution data set. And you can see this is the pipeline that I already discussed. We do have. So the contribution, we have 2 different kind of contribution. We have knowledge contribution and we have artifact contribution. The knowledge contribution is advancing human understanding. So for example, here we said our evaluation reveals a significant gap performance between high resource. This is a contribution advancing human understanding. And then we have artifact contribution, creating new reusable system. So this is artifact contribution where we said we released 2 new data sets. So this is artifacts. So you can see we have 2 different kind of contribution, knowledge and artifact, and we categorize them. You can see for knowledge, we have knowledge data set, language, method, people, tags. These are different contribution we have. And for artifact, we have data set, we have method, we have tags. So for example, for data set here, you can see what kind of the contribution is this. Introduce a new NLP data set, right? So these are different kind of contribution. This is an example also of contribution that you can check in our paper. So why do we need African NLP contribution data set? Now, we take all these data, these papers, 1,900, and we annotate each sentence in the contribution, and we classify it as whether knowledge contribution, whether artifact. And this will allow us to understand what progress has been made and reveals the gap. If we understand, okay, African NLP, they are not creating new models. African NLP, they only focus on creating data set. Then we say, okay, there is a gap. So we created this data set, manually annotated. And then we do kind of a benchmarking contribution. The goal is to automatically classify contribution from predefined 5 classes. So you can see these are the 5 classes. We have language, method. This method is a new method created, a contribution, a new method. This is K tags is a new task. For example, somebody create a new, very new tags. This is knowledge tags. So we can see we have 8 classes that we classified, and we can see that here you can see Afro SLMR did a good job, and also Cyber did a good job. One of the key things you can consider, look at it, that Cyber look a good job in K method. K method means the methodology, and Cyber was trained on scientific papers. So that's why it has a good performance. You can see that also it has a good performance. But for Afro SLMR, because it's African-centric language model, it was able to have a better performance for knowledge people, because in the abstract we automatically mention maybe people from Africa, from Hausa and something like that. So it's really good. Also for data set, obviously the data set we annotate, they are all from African centric, and you can see the performance is good. So our African NLP data set was benchmarked. We created it. We have train set and this test set and evaluation set, and this data set can be used now to further be able to classify what kind of contribution we have in the NLP community. Yeah. All right. So again, one of the key things here, we have a lot of contribution here, but there is a paradox of progress in the era of NLP. We can see 2 decades, NLP moved from very simple few papers and now to close to 2,000 papers, but yet foundation models still underrepresent African languages. only few supported, across models. I think from one of our paper, the set of large language model, which won the best paper award at Deep Learning Endeavor, I think we itemized, I think only 43 out of 2,000 languages that are included in all the current large language model. So this means that this progress is at the periphery. So exclusion at the core AI of global AI. We can see everyone, we said we have low resource languages, but for African NLP, this progress is at the periphery. We are still yet to go into the deeper, models inclusion for all the model availability. Now, have a look at the progress of African NLP, and then let's move on to see the second part that I call the illusion of inclusion. Now, what that means, I have what we call, I call triple gap that actually limit African languages. The first one is pre-training data. So the pre-training data is biased and noisy. Number two, evaluation data, they are inaccurate and unreliable. Number three, culture missing, the cultural blind spot of LLMs. So let's dive into one of them and see what that means. So the first one is pre-training data, which are bias and noise. So we know that for every LLMs we have, one of the key things to have a very good data, to have a very good language model, is as good if you have pre-training data. But for African languages, there is an issue. Most multilingual corpora that used to develop or to create language model, they do not contain African languages. In fact, if they include African languages, the data is noisy. Some of them are translated, direct translation. Some of them, they may limit domain. For example, they are mostly, Bible, coming from a Bible data set. And when you train your model on this Bible related data set, your model will be biased to, domain that the model was trained. So in this case, African languages become statistically invisible during LLM pre-training. That means when you do stuff for African languages, you may not be able to get on par performance with languages from higher resource languages. Now let's look at a very few examples, some of our work that show this idea. The first thing I want to show you here, I always say that, is that this is an example of common crawl data set. You can see the percentage of English in common crawl is 45%, right? French, 4.7, German, 5.7, other European languages are this. And you can see, where is African languages? You can see down here, we have other Asian, right? And you can see all other, right? All other is what? 0.05%. Arabic 0.6, and this is what we call data common crawl. That is a data that's been crawled from all the internet. That is internet archive, and the percentage of African languages that you can see, this is the percentage. What is it? 0.05%. Not all African languages, but we are lumped into what we call other, meaning African languages are inside 0.05%, and this is one of the biggest, data set common crawl that is used. So you can see there is actually bias in pre-training data. African languages are not involved, and definitely they will be missing. The performance will be poor. The performance will be not on par with high resource languages. But not only this, let's look at one of these work, which we did since 2022, quality at glance. So in this work, what we did, we manually audit the quality of 205 languages specific corpora, including CC Align, Paraclore, and all these ones. We manually audit them to find out what is the issue with this data set. And we find some systematic issues. At least 15 corpora from Africa have no usable text inside them, and significant less than 50% sentences are of acceptable quality, and many are misleveled. What I mean by mislevel is that you can see a language is called Hausa, but it's leveled as Swahili. And this model, the data set will be taken and train a model with Hausa data as Swahili, right? So you can see this is a really an issue where whenever our data set is noisy, it's not of high quality, instead to create a positive stuff, but it end up creating negative impression, that what I call representation washing. What is representation washing? community, we African NLP people, we feel the sense of progress. Hausa, Yoruba, Swahili, all these languages are included in Common Crawl, right? But this Common Crawl data set, the data set there, they are of low quality, right? And when they are benchmarked, they may exaggerate the model performance, making low resource NLP appear more solved than it is. So when the data is not quality, it's not good, and the people are using the data set and now giving a evaluating model or evaluating whatever, and they give a false metric, which does not. And this effect could result in productive effort being redirected away from these languages. So if we now have all the world big data set, they say, okay, we include all the African languages. Okay, people will sit down, okay, African NLP problem is solved, the data set is solved, now let's move on, which is not true, because the African NLP data set are not good or high quality enough to make sure that they work as expected. Another thing from our paper, The Self of Large Language Model, we found that Africa has 23 writing systems. Yeah, 23 writing systems, but only 3 are represented in current LLMs tokenizers. So the Latin, the Arabic, and Gates, these are the only 3 represented in a model tokenizer that we have today. And then in that case, most African scripts are invisible to LLMs. We said 23, that means 20 are absent in all the language model. So, hello, somebody is disturbing us. Okay. So most African scripts are invisible because, as we can see here, we have 23 writing systems, but only 3 are now available in, model tokenizer. Missing script, of course, broken tokenization, as we know, and the loss of meaning and semantic noise during training. So which is really, really a problem that pre-training data for African languages is biased and noisy. Now, having understand one of the triple effect that I said, which is pre-training data, let's move on to the evaluation data, which I said they are inaccurate and unreliable. Now, if we have our training data, our pre-training data is not good, let's assume the pre-training data is good. But often at times, even the evaluation data is not correct, it's not good. Let's look at it. So most multilingual benchmark often represent African languages. Why? Because they are often, machine translated. And if these benchmark data set that are used are machine translated, then the claim misrepresent model capability of African languages because they are translated benchmark. One of our work correcting Flores evaluation data set for 4 African languages we did, we basically took Flores data set, which most of us know Flores is one of widely used evaluation data set for MT, especially for African languages. But in 4 languages we audited, which is Hausa, Tonga, Sekreto, and Isizulu, we found translation errors, inconsistency, and often machine-generated text. Yeah, so for example, for Hausa, we found that most of the text has been generated by Google Translate. And this means that all the evaluation that have been done using Flores dataset has been misrepresenting African languages. And of course, if the evaluation set is broken, the claims for model performance are all broken. So all the previous, model performance that has been reported using Flores dataset are broken. Why? Because those languages, those dataset, they are not of good quality. They are basically there are a lot of inconsistency. Often some of them, they are not real, they are machine generated. So the model performance is actually broken, which is something that I found really funny that a lot of people from Flores, people are heavily using Flores dataset to evaluate their machine translation model, which we now know that there has been a very serious issue with Flores dataset. And I will encourage many people, if you are interested to take your data for your own language, Flores data contain widely many African languages. Take your data for your language and try to audit that data. and try to find out what happens with their data set. And this is something we are working to extend our work to more African languages. And you can reach out if you want to, extend or validate or audit the data for your language. Moving on, this is what our recommendation is. Future translation efforts, particularly in low-resource language, protect the active involvement of native speakers at every stage of the process to ensure linguistic accuracy and cultural level. The reason why I say this is the Flores data sets have been, created manually. It's not something, that actually created automatically. No, they hire people, pay people to create that data set, but those people that are hired may not be the native speakers. Therefore, they end up translating. Of course, I was one time a manager for a project, and I'm leading Hausa, and the person that is, I came to the project that worked on Hausa, he's not a Hausa background, he's not from Hausa, and what he was doing is translate the data from from English to Hausa using Google Translate, and now he give the data to somebody to look up some correction and edit it. So our own recommendation is that whenever we are creating data set for African languages, the very first thing is we make sure that the people that are creating the data set are the native speakers, people that speak the language, people that know the culture, people that could depend the language wherever, whatever it's written about the language. They know the culture and know also every linguistic, issue that relates with the language. So this is about evaluation data. We have now seen the pre-training data is broken, evaluation data is broken. Then another thing about evaluation is that most African languages are focused in simplest classification. When we do evaluation for LLMs, we can say, okay, for LLMs, we have sentiment classification, head speed detection, whatsoever. Or we can say we have name entity recognition. All this one, you can see they are classification problem. But for African languages, we have very, very few data set for generation, reasoning, QA. So this is also a missing benchmark that it's not possible to compare the African language with other high resource languages because we don't have shared benchmark to show the progress. So this is also one of the key issues that we need to close the gap to have more complex evaluation data set rather than the simple classification benchmarks. Then the last one is missing culture. So LLMs can produce African text. Of course, we know you can write, it can produce African text to some extent, but linguistic fluency is not cultural understanding. Yes. Someone will say, yeah, ChatGPT or any other LLM can produce a quite fluent text in Swahili. Yeah. But does it really capture also the, cultural understanding of the people? No, in many cases, no. This is one of our work called Blend, a benchmark for LLMs on everyday knowledge in diverse culture and languages. And if we have cultural errors, this can lead to harmful stereotype. So let's look at one of our work for Blend. So this work Blend comprised of 52,000 question answer pairs from 16 countries. And we can see the performance we evaluate on English from culture in US is 79% accurate and only 12% on Amharic and Hausa. So as you can see the culture, even GPT, now we have GPT-5 and whatever, but you can see the gap is really great. It takes a lot of time to close this gap. 79% and 12% accuracy on culture is really huge gap. As you can see, this is an example of the questions we have. For example, one of the questions here, we can see the first one here. If you look at it here, what is the most common eaten food in sport stadium while watching games in the US? So now what we did was that we localize this questions. So in Nigeria, we can say what is the most, and also in our own language, in Hausa, we write this prompt in Hausa, this question and answers in Hausa, and also reflect our own culture. And we found that LLMs actually misrepresent or cannot capture African culture. The only thing we can see is that it can do 20%, which is unacceptable rate if you have 79 to or 80% for, English from USS. LLMs perform better in English than the local languages. And another thing we found out is that all these questions we have them in two. We have the questions in English, and then we have the questions in local African language. And we found that even though the local language, for example, Hausa, the culture is written in Hausa, LLM cannot be able to understand the culture. It understands the culture more when we translate these written multiple questions from Hausa to English. So LLM has better performance in English rather than on the local language. This paper also, Blend won the best paper award, one of the workshop at New Reefs Iclear. Yeah, so this is actually the triple gap. Pre-training data is biased and noisy. Evaluation data, they are inaccurate, as we have seen, and unreliable. One of our work that we audit, Flores data set, we have seen a lot of inconsistency. Some of the data are machine generated, and also culture missing, cultural blind spot of LLMs. We have seen that LLMs cannot be able to answer some specific questions from African languages, only 12%. And what can we do? Of course, we need to put huge effort for pre-training data, reliable evaluation benchmark, and culturally grounded understanding. And thank God, recently we have a lot of grants coming from to Africa, thanks to Bill and Melinda and Foundation. They have put some effort to see AfricaNLP is growing, and there are a lot of traction toward that, creating more and more data set for African languages. And these are some of the things that I have recently discussed about the triple gap. So what is missing in pre-training? Clean and diverse data, and if we don't have, we can have bias. And for evaluation, we need reliable benchmarks. So we need benchmark that is reliable. If not, we will have distorted performance. You will report that the accuracy is 79 or 80 for Hausa, but initially, if we look at the data set, you are misrepresenting the performance. And lastly, the culture, we need to have data set that LLMs that are culturally grounded. They can understand culture from African context. And then finally, I will present some of our work that we have been doing in Africa, selected works. Right. So the first one here, you can see we have some of the work I selected here, Brighter, which is emotion data set for many languages, but we focus also on African languages. And this paper won the best paper award in ACL 2025 resource paper. We have Afro SLMR and word translation in the era of large language model. I will talk a bit about this and maybe skip some of them. So let's go into the Brighter. So this is a Brighter, which basically is we try to see, is it good LLM can detect emotion in languages from Africa and beyond. One interesting thing is that this project, the data set we created was also used for sumable shared tags co-located with ACL. Interestingly, both the paper and also the shared tags got the award at the best tax paper and also best paper award. And if you are interested, you can check the project here. But let's dive into the what emotion. Human communication is deeply emotional, right? People will share some happiness, anger, and whatsoever. But multilingual and cultural challenges, what you perceive as happiness or sadness or fear in one culture may be different in another culture. So it is very difficult to, universalize the emotion from different culture. What we did in this project, we said, okay, we are going to focus on what we term perceived emotion. What emotion most people, some people will say, okay, this is not the emotion. But what we agree is this: what most people will think the speaker may be feeling, given a sentence or short snippet, what most people will perceive the emotion. Maybe if most 80-60% say this is happiness, then we term this sentence or this sentence is perceived as happiness. So this is what we define our task, and we created a data set, more than 100,000 instances we created, and predominantly 12 of these comes from Africa, from 28 languages. And you can see here we have many of these languages, as you can see them. And the data set was created from different domain, speech, social media, literature, and reviews. And this is the brighter data set distribution. We can see we have anger, disgust, fear. And you can see we have the distribution is not equal in all the classes, which of course something that we, which is something that is true. Yeah, so we annotated more than 100 instances from this data set. As you can see them, the classes are more than 100,000. And the data size vary from 1,600 to 7,600. So some of the classes for some languages, as you can see, these are the languages here. Some of the sizes vary from one language to another. And also variation in distribution. We have also variation in distribution of the data set. Some of them you can see some languages may have anger, which with a lot of, number of anger, some of them, so there is variation toward that as well. What we found out is that number one is that overall models learn to perform better when prompted in English. What that means is that when we have a prompt in Hausa, we use that to ask an emotion for that sentence. The model performs low than when we translate that sentence into English. That is it. Overall, models tend to perform better in English. And also you can see here, we have this performance. You can see everything inside is low resource, all African languages. You can see all African languages, but you can see here outside we have Hindi, for example, and you can see all the, high resource language having better performance and low resource with low performance. And finally, for brighter, we concluded that LLM still struggle with predicting passive emotion, and they have low performance in low resource African languages. Another work we have is recently is what translation in the era of large language model. We know now machine translation, LLMs show a good performance for MT at sentence and document level, right? You can put, for zero shot, you just put it for zero shot, you can have a very good translation. But what translation is also crucial, especially for low resource NLP, because what translation you can create bilingual dictionary, you can create many other things. So what we did, we evaluated LLMs for what translation tags, and we evaluated 106 languages, including many African low resource languages, and we benchmark against PALEX. So for any language that we use LLMs to translate, we give about 40,000 words in English, and we ask the LLM to translate to Hausa. And then we have PALEX, which is a dictionary, multilingual dictionary with more than 2,000 or 5,000 languages, I think. So we benchmark for any prediction from LLMs. We compare with content from PALEX and see what is the performance. We also compare the performance of LLMs with Google Translate, traditional machine translation system, and we found a very huge gap performance. So performance comparison, we can see here that this is high resource language and this is low resource language. So for Gemini, we can see it's really pretty good. We can see it is only Gemma 2.0 that has a very good performance, up to 36%, to try to translate African languages, words into word that map with, Google, the gold standard from PALEX. And we can see a very poor performance in all other open source. You can see that, but the only two things we can see, Gemini and Google, they have a very good performance, right? Maybe they share some training data, of course, maybe. So we can see here that closed source models here from Google Translate and Gemini, they have better performance compared to open source such as NLP. Here also we have pairwise agreement, and here what we did is we tried to find out which models give consistent output. So we can see here for Google and Gemini, their output always agree up to 23%. So this is also a very few agreement we have. And the last but not least, one thing that we're trying to see is that earliest we have LLM, large language model, but Fine-tuning still wins in African languages through what we call continual pre-training of African languages. So we need to have maybe smaller, we need to rethink. We don't need to go far to say we need to have a very huge LLMs and whatsoever. Let's start from the beginning. So one of our work, Afro SLMR, which has been accepted at EMNLP, is that we did what is called domain adaptive pre-training and task adaptive pre-training. That means we take an existing pre-trained language model and we continue training it on social media data for African languages. So we create a corpus called AfriSocial Corpus, which is a large-scale social media data for African languages. And we did continued pre-training. The first one we did domain adaptive pre-training. We adapt domain, and then we do the second one we did task adaptive pre-training. And we find out that the performance for AfriSocial SMR consistently outperform GPT-4 or Gemini and Llama. That means continual pre-training remains the vital resource for culturally African languages rather than GPT-4 or other huge LLM. But what is the intuition here? We can see GPT very huge, very large, but Afro SLMR social is very small and it outperform all these stuff. This is also a work from Ojo and et al. From David. As we can see, they also show that Afro SLMR actually works better if we fine-tune them. It outperforms LLMs such as GPT-4 or Gemini, Llama, and whatsoever. So this is interesting because everywhere we are talking about LLM, GPT, but this GPT, as we can see, smaller models are much better than them. Now, what is the direction? Can we still, continue fine-tuning smaller models until the large language models, have a good performance? What is the way forward? So this is something we can see that for me, I said progress for African NLP must begin with linguistic infrastructure, not parameter inflation. We don't need to go and say, okay, huge billion parameters. But before we scale up model, we must scale off languages. That's the point. Before we must scale up any parameters, we need to scale up the languages. We need to scale up the number of data set. We need to scale up the number of languages our LLMs can understand rather than parameter inflation. So this is one key point. And finally, what we have seen here, we have seen that African NLP collaborations such as Masakani have transformed the African NLP landscape, and therefore grassroots community are the true infrastructure of African NLP. And therefore we need more community-led effort to ensure languages are not left behind. And that with this, I conclude with saying inclusion is not automatic. We must design for it. We must come together, everyone, the stakeholders, the linguists, the machine learning engineer, the NLP, everyone, we must come together. The big techs comes together to support the African languages. With this, I think I would say thank you very much. Coming to my last slide, and I'll be happy to take some questions. Thank you very much.
And that was wonderful presentation. Thank you very, very much, Shamsuddin. We have questions, and please, we also have time for questions. Oh, Nasiru, you have your hand raised. Do you want to go first? And then Jan, you can just come off mute and ask your question. Jan, you will be next.
All right. Thank you, Doctor, for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Please, Doctor, what are the potential consequences of the LLM's limitation in African languages and cultural context for user, particularly in the area like education, healthcare, or governance? What are the potential consequences? Thank you.
Right. So he's asking, what are the potential consequences for LLMs in many subfields if they are not performing really well? So what I said here is that if we have, excuse me, I want to show you. Yeah. So if we have these cultural errors lead to harmful stereotypes. Now, if we have LLMs that actually does not reflect African culture, it may lead to stereotype, different kind of stereotype. Now, maybe we can say, okay, what kind of foods people from Kenya eat, or what kind of what kind of religion do they believe in? Maybe you can say they are all atheists, right? Of course, we know we have we have a Christian, we have Muslim, whatsoever. But in essence, what I'm saying is that cultural errors that LLM does not reflect, capture African language can lead to many stereotypes. Yeah. So, for example, we did one of the current work we are doing is that we are trying to look at what kind of stereotype it can be. A stereotype from women. Given a text, you can ask LLMs to do some stuff, but it can always report back to something regarding to men. So this is a stereotype actually about that gender stereotype stuff. So we have different kind of stereotype, and this is one of the key things.
Okay, Ian, do you want to go, or I can just read for you the question if you want?
No, super happy to go. Thanks, Millicent, and good morning or afternoon, and thank you very much, Mohammed, for the presentation. My question was, at least the first one, on do you have any correlation on the type of founders and funding that we have and the type of research? Meaning, do you see any interesting patterns between who found for what? And notably, I'm particularly interested, in this stereotypes topic, in the sense, do you see local institutions, researchers, and maybe companies interested in that, whereas my feeling or perception is that it's mostly global organizations that are mostly interested in the bias reduction and stereotypes. But it's not based on data, it's purely intuition. So yeah, I would like to see if you have any data on that.
Yeah, are you talking about this one?
Not actually the contributors, but mostly the founders. I think you had a slide, yet these ones, and the correlation with the type of research or artifact or knowledge that is being produced.
Okay.
So I don't know, it's probably not one of the slides you have, but I'm wondering if you did like some correlation and you found like interesting patterns coming out.
Can you come over the question, please? Maybe I'm missing it.
Sorry. So you see, you have different founders who provide funding for the type of research. And then after you have the different type of artifacts or knowledge that is produced. But I'm wondering if you see any interesting correlations between where the money is coming from and the type of research that is produced, or the type of knowledge or artifact that is produced. If you see any correlation that is interesting.
So, well, actually, I understand the question now, but we haven't explored that question to see if there is any correlation between the artifact and the funders, what the people try to do. That's something interesting to look at, to see what maybe funders are more interested in. That is why they put more effort, they fund stuff and what's. But what we found out is one, that for AfricaNLP, generally the data set is what people do, the artifact. So data set, I think I have slide, or maybe in our paper for AfricaNLP, what we found out was that the artifact is basically the data set. So the data set is what we found out, is what most people, and also in the knowledge inclusion is what we found out, AfricaNLP, most people do.
Okay, very clear. Thanks, Mohammed.
Yeah, it will be great. Dan, you can go. Dan Lamy, you can ask your question, or maybe it's a mistake. Your hand is up. Otherwise, Daniel.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Doctor, for this very interesting presentation. It was quite interesting, and I think many people will believe with me here that we're going to take a lot of things back up. My question is this, and I quite agree with you, where you've mentioned about the infrastructure deficiencies, especially linguistic infrastructure. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is what we do here. For example, basically for me, I work on machine translation, and you mentioned quite a number of fine-tuning strategies, most especially the domain adaptation.
Yeah.
And that is very quite interesting because no matter how many fine-tuning you go along with it, we all agree that the low resource African languages are lack in data set completely. So we need to show about this data set. And one of the best way to do is practically doing that fine-tuning, the continual fine-tuning, and then domain adaptation fine-tuning. That quite agreed. Now the question is, you made mention of Flourish dataset being noisy, being biased, and it's not even credible for evaluation. So what happened at this point for someone who is working, for example, in the task of machine translation? Now, if it is agreed that some of these benchmarking evaluation datasets are not adequate enough to be able to evaluate some of those things, what is your proposal? What is your preposition? What do you think will be the next thing to do? Could you also involve in those curated datasets you are using and then make them as a benchmark evaluation? Or could you look at other crawl or other datasets and then make them as a benchmark for your own task?
Yeah. So as I said, you know, many people, many organizations, different people sit down to create evaluation data set. But the problem is that people that are directly involved in these, you know, languages that know the culture are not involved. What happened now if they are not involved? Anybody can create that data set and the evaluation data set, and the data set will not be of good quality. My recommendation is that whenever we want to create, you know, use any evaluation data set, we must make sure that we check the quality of the data set. If the data set is not qualitative, then we need to, you know, audit it and now, you know, do the evaluation on the data set. Of course, many people will not stop creating the evaluation data set. Everyone will create. But the question is, how qualitative is that evaluation data set is? It is left for us, our community, AfricaNLP community, you, for example, one of our work that we audit Florex, it is left for us to go and audit that data set to make sure that, you know, the data set is of high quality.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
So Mohammed, and then Gimal, you're next. And sorry, guys, we are like out of time, but yeah, we'll stay a little bit longer if you have time. I think the questions are really interesting. Mohammed, then Gimal.
Hi, Shamsuddeen. It's wonderful to see you. It's been a while.
Long time,
Shamsuddeen, this has been a really interesting talk. I want to sort of come at it with from a slightly different perspective, which is usefulness versus representativeness. Even with sort of GPT-3 and the early GPT-4s, they may not be very good at Swahili, but I can get them to do very interesting and useful things in Swahili. And then domains where we lack resourcing become interesting. So domains like education and healthcare, where because of the model sheer size and the amount of information that it pulls in, they actually become quite useful. But they're not necessarily going to give you perfect Hausa or Somali or Amharic. Yeah, but they are useful. So I'm interested in this boundary in your mind between being useful and being representative.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think for all aspect and in all entirety, I can see that we cannot make a blanket statement that they are not useful, the LLM at this point in time, because in some sense, you know, from the explanation you did, you said some stuff, they can be useful to do some other stuff. But I think one of the key things that I discuss here is about the cultural blindness. They may not actually carry our own culture. So I'm looking at it from the perspective of culture, not usefulness in other aspects. So if we look at for usefulness in other aspects, yes, of course, they can do, you know, a lot of stuff. They can be helpful for this LLM, and they have been helpful. But if we talk about culture at some point, I think we have still a long way to make this language model culture, you know, culturally with our own culture from Africa.
Which sort of goes into the other question that I had, which is we are not going to suddenly get pocketfuls of cash to have people annotate them. And the exponential sort of, there isn't likely to be an exponential growth in text and interaction, at least text, in African languages. So how do we, what strategies do we have? How do we incentivize to make that growth?
That's an interesting question. I think one of the key things is we need to get, one of the key things always for data set is to get funding, right? Incentivize. And you're sure, like, you know, when we started Masakani, for example, people come from the community, they just work together without funding, create data science whatsoever. But now I think things have changed even in our community, Masakani as well. You know, that kind of spirit of people coming together is, you know, fading away. But still we do that. But I think the main thing that, you know, drive progress is funding. We need to have funding that comes. As I said in my talk, we recently, you know, started getting funding for AfricaNLP, which is really good. And I think it will make a really change in the AfricaNLP community in the next couple of years. Yeah.
And point taken, I will join the next meeting.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Shamsuddeen.
All right, thank you. So I think
oh, actually, you have to catch your flight, Shamsuddin, right? Or do we still have time?
I'm catching my flight now.
Oh my gosh! Okay, he was at the airport. Oh my gosh, this was quite interesting. I forgot.
I need to tell Dilma Terese if you want to talk, contribute. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to miss a flight, so yeah, we'll talk next time. Thanks.
All right. I'm so sorry. My driver is waiting for me. I'm flying back to London right now. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Shamsuddin. It's wonderful.
Okay, so
Good to see
All right.
you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good to see you.
Okay, bye. Bye.
Bye.